Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. So for this Stephen King video, I will be doing a dedicated review for one of my all-time favorite Stephen King books. And that would, of course, be Revival. And this is definitely one of my all-time favorite that snuck into my top 10 Stephen King books, especially after rereading it. I will admit the first time I read this book, I gave it 4 stars. I didn't absolutely love it, but on a reread, I've now reread this book 3 times now. I absolutely love this book. I don't really have any faults with it. In fact, this book, I should say this review, is just going to be me gushing about it the whole time and explaining why I love this book so much. There's definitely specific reasons why I love this book and why it's in my top 10. So if you're looking for any kind of faults with the book, this isn't really that review. I love this book. It's in my top 10. And this review is just going to be me talking about why that is. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So, Revival, like I mentioned, definitely a top favorite for me. It is in my top 10 favorites. It's also one of Stephen King's best newer books, and it's a book that I often point to people because there's a lot of people in my comments and subscribers who tell me like, "Oh, I love earlier King. I love 70s, I love 80s, and then in the 90s and early 2000s, all of that is just going downhill, and I love all his older stuff. All his newer stuff is no good." But I try to point those kind of people, those kind of King haters, I try to point them into this direction, Revival, because this does kind of remind me of older Stephen King a bit, and it does have that edge to it because this is a very dark book. It goes places, and it definitely has one of the more nihilistic endings. I will keep this spoiler free, so I'm not going to spoil any kind of major plot points. I will kind of maybe talk about the beginning of the book and where it starts, and then where it goes from there, you'll have to read and find out. But essentially, I try to tell those people who love his older stuff but hate his newer stuff, check out this book because this does have that kind of same gritty feeling that a lot of his older stuff has, and it definitely packs a punch, at least in my opinion. So if you guys know nothing about Revival, know nothing about what this book is about, let me tell you. It's one of those books that follows like a character's whole life, or at least most of it, and you're getting the whole book from a first person account of Jamie. And the book is written in a way where he's telling you basically his life story, and it starts when he's 3 years old in the small town in Maine. Obviously, Stephen King loves to write small towns in Maine, but this one is interesting because you start when he's like 3 years old. He's in a very typical American family, and he one day meets this new minister that moves into town, and his family, and he's getting wrapped up in their doings. But then a couple years down the road, a couple chapters later, something very dark and twisted happens to this minister. And it really the novel kind of shifts from there. And then you get Jamie as he's older. Like basically every chapter, he's just a bit older and older. And in subsequent chapters, I won't say anything specifically, but he does meet up with this minister where something very dark happened to him, back when Jamie was young, and then when Jamie's older, he keeps popping back in his life. And weird things start happening with Jamie because of that, this new minister whose name is Charles Jacobs. So fantastic characters. Jamie is definitely one of my favorite Stephen King protagonists for a few reasons. Number one, later on in his life, I won't go into super spoiler territory, but he does deal with some addiction, and Stephen King really does addiction well. He writes it very well, I think, because writers write what they know, right? And Stephen King was definitely an addict, and he's written some fantastic addicts like Jack Torrance, but Jamie is definitely a very great portrayal of that. Jamie also later on in life becomes a very good musician, and I love musician characters. I am a musician myself, the bookish drummer, so I love when characters have a bit of musical knowledge, and he does as well, specifically with the guitar. And I also think the structure of this book works very well because it's Jamie recounting his life from when he was 3 years old, and then when the novel ends, he's much, much older. So it spans really his whole life, which I think, I was saying like King fans from the 70s and 80s would appreciate this book, but I think if he tried to write this book back then, it would be a lot longer. But I think definitely King, like newer King, is definitely more able to have better pacing and have a better editor because this book is only about 400 pages. When I think if he wrote this back in the 80s, this would be 1,000-page tome spanning this whole guy's life. But I think this book captures something very beautiful and very kind of dismal in a way where, like, you're reading about this guy and his whole life flashes by very quickly, and I think that's kind of the whole point. It's just like your life can go by very quickly, and all of a sudden, I'm 30 years old. Like, where did the time go? Although he is a bit older, but I'm saying for myself, I'm not having a midlife crisis. I'm not. But anyway, yeah, I think this book does capture something very interesting because it's only 400 pages, but it basically spans this whole guy's life, and I think it's very beautiful in that way. And I also think the rivalry between Jamie and Reverend Charles Jacobs, fantastic characters. These characters would probably make my, if I did like a grand best Stephen King characters list, they'd be somewhere on there. It's definitely Jamie as well. Just fantastic characters, and all the side characters that he meets along the journey. Like, he starts out, he's with his family, but as he gets older, he starts meeting more and more people, and they're all great as well. And you can definitely see the progression of their characters change because when Charles Jacobs is introduced at the beginning compared to where he is at the end, very different people. Same thing with Jamie as well. So it's very good character development, as always, from Stephen King. Not that I have any faults with this book, but maybe the one slight downside to this book is I think that the beginning of this book, the very beginning, like the first 3 to 4 chapters and the last 3 to 4 chapters, are the most memorable parts of the book, and they're the best parts of the book. Not to say that the middle chunk isn't great as well, because it's all 5 stars for me, but I will say that when I go back to remember this book, especially if I haven't reread it in a long time, I remember the very beginning and I remember the very end, but the middle is a bit hazy, but it's still great. And it kind of works in a way too, because I love revisiting this book, and kind of forgetting chunks of the book makes it feel kind of fresh in a way. So it works for me, but I know for a lot of people, I think most people who read this book do really enjoy the book, but they probably have a similar reaction where they like the beginning and the end, but a parts of it in the middle might feel a little wonky or not as great as the beginning or the end. So I think for some people, a lot of constant readers, they like this book, but they love the ending, love the beginning, but the middle isn't as good as those two. So that's maybe the one downside to the book, but for me personally, I love the whole thing and give it 5 stars. I will say probably the best aspect of this book, besides the characters and the character development, is the ending. Now, I know for a lot of people, when they think of Stephen King, they tend to think of him having bad endings, which I think in some ways is warranted. A lot of his best books, in my opinion, do have bad endings. Like The Stand, a lot of people cite that as his best book, but I think the ending in that is really dumb. Also, the ending to It has some messed up qualities to it, and then Under the Dome is just really bad. But a lot of his endings are not necessarily great, but they're serviceable at least. But he does have some great endings. And I think this is one of his best endings he's ever done. And in a way, it's just super, like, sometimes, here's the thing. With Stephen King, a lot of the times he can write these really depressing horror books or very creepy books, and they still end up in a hopeful place. Like, I don't want to spoil some books, but definitely some of his more popular books, they do end in kind of a hopeful way where, like, okay, the characters, they went through hell, but you can kind of see them going through this or getting through this and living a happy life. With this book, that's not that at all, which is very surprising. Like, this is a very nihilistic and depressing ending, which Stephen King normally would use his Richard Bachman pseudonym for those kinds, because you read stuff like The Long Walk and The Running Man and Thinner and Blaze, like all of those have very nihilistic endings. But normally for his Stephen King books, not Richard Bachman books, they can kind of end in a hopeful way, or at least in a somewhat good way. But this book, the ending is just super nihilistic and very offbeat from normal Stephen King endings. And I think it really stands out because of that. And I think it is fitting with the themes of religion and life and death that happens in this book. And I think it's just very fitting. And I know a lot of people, it could be a make or break moment for them because of that ending. But for me, it worked perfectly. It's one of the more unforgettable endings I've ever read. It's one of those things that are good. It's going to live rent free in my brain of like, oh, wow, that ending I will never forget. So if you read this book, be prepared for a pretty messed up ending. Yeah, it's definitely, well, I won't say definitely, but it's one of the best parts of this book. I also just love the characters and the structure and the writing, but that ending is what really sells this book for me. Because, sometimes you get to the end of a Stephen King book and you're like, okay, that was good. It's a 4-star book. But for me, like, the ending really sold it for me. So if any of what I said to you about this book interests you, please read this book, especially if you're a longtime constant reader who hasn't really gotten along with some of his newer stuff. Like, you love his 70s and 80s stuff. Like, you love The Shining, you love The Stand, you love It, you love Pet Sematary, you love all that stuff, but really haven't gotten along with some of his newer stuff. Check out Revival, because it might surprise you. All right, so that is my quick little review for one of my all-time favorite Stephen King books, Revival. Ba ba ba. But yeah, this book is fantastic. Definitely a top 10 Stephen King book for me. And like I mentioned, please check this book out if you're a longtime Stephen King reader. And just if you're, yeah, I wouldn't recommend this as a first-time Stephen King read, but it's fantastic. Give it a shot. What I want to know is whether you agree or disagree with my review here. Do you love Revival like I do? Do you hate Revival? Or do you think it's kind of meh? Also, what do you think of the ending? Please don't spoil it for anybody in the comments. If you're going to talk about it, do the ... thing and hide it so that people don't get spoiled, because I want to get people's reactions to it. Also, I forgot to mention that Revival was actually our pick for the Stephen King Book Club in the month of October. So I had a blast rereading this. I just finished my reread of it a few days ago, and it's fun to get people's reactions who are reading it for the very first time, including Ian from Ian the Reader, which we're co-hosting the Stephen King Book Club together. He hasn't read this book yet, and I'm very anxious to get his opinion on the book. We're also reading the Tommyknockers for the Stephen King Book Club in October, and I'm like more than halfway through that book, and good God, what a contrast. That is actually going to be the review for next Friday, for Stephen King Friday. Yeah, it's not good, y'all. It's not good, but I will do a dedicated book review for it, because a lot of people were saying that they love Tommyknockers, and I wanted to reread it to, like, I was very confused. Yeah, I don't even know what to say. A lot of people said it was great, and then I basically said, you know what, I'm going to reread it and figure out for myself. And yeah, I was right. I should have just not done this because it's bad. But it'll be fun to talk about it anyway. So that's next Friday. But yeah, what did you guys think of Revival? If you've read it, comment down below. If you haven't read it, have I convinced you to try it? Or did I do the opposite? Did I scare you away? Either way, comment down below. We'll chat about it. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you are subscribed, stay subscribed for more content. I try to post every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Like I mentioned, Stephen King Friday. Next Friday will be the Tommyknockers review. That'll be fun. But anyway, what else have I got? Bookish Sherman Discord, like I mentioned. tons of buddy reads and read-alongs, including the Stephen King Book Club, which we're doing Revival and Tommyknockers in October. In November, speaking of bad Stephen King books, we're going to be tackling one of my personal favorites, but I know it's a lot of people's least favorites, Roadwork. Love me some Bachman, and this is definitely my favorite Richard Bachman book. A lot of people hate it, but give it a shot. You might be surprised. But anyway, I also have my Patreon link down below if you want to go support me there for as little as $1 a month, and my Amazon wishlist if you'd like to buy me a book. Thank you guys so much for watching. Have a fantastic day.